Hello, art friends. If you're like me and like to work small in your sketchbooks, sometimes end up with pieces that you really like and wish you could scale up. In this video, I'm going to be walking through my process for scaling up these two small collages to a larger version. The first step is to collect all the papers that I used from the first set of collages. And unfortunately, I didn't have probably all of the same ones, so I got the ones I could find and something that was close. Paper here is about 6 by 9.5 inches, so it's not even square. It's a whole different format, but it was a scrap of watercolor paper I had laying around, so I figured I would just use it up. I did apply a coat of gesso to it to prepare it in case I wanted to actually use some paint. And then I let it completely dry. Now, when you scale up, you have to think bigger. When you're working with the little small 6 by 6 collages, everything is scaled for that size. So in scaling it up, I had to think about making my bigger pieces even bigger to fit the space. So I started with some bigger pieces, and these were just some plain sort of teal color pieces. And the thing about scaling up or doing larger collages is if you have a small jelly plate and you're making, smaller papers, it's sometimes hard to find bigger sections of those papers left to do a larger version. So you either have to go back and create more papers, or I have a 12 by 12 jelly plate. So I make large papers to start with, knowing that I may want to use some bigger pieces for larger collages. So I put an old, part of an old book page in with some writing on it, like I had in the two mini collages. I found a piece of watercolor paper that had some of the sort of burnt sienna red colors in it that were close to the paper I used there in the original collages. I also had some circle elements that were just stamped on paper. And so I'm just cutting out some pieces and ripping out some pieces. And then I'm going to just try to lay this all in a composition that is reminiscent of the smaller collages. I only had a little bit of that sort of stencil pattern, so I had to try to make that work where I could. So here I'm just playing with some of the pieces to get everything in, making sure I'm using all of the colors, making sure I have a variety of sizes too. Even though everything's scaled up, I still want some pieces that are larger and some pieces that are smaller. And I want to, try to keep my colors kind of distributed throughout the collage. So here I'm just playing a little bit with some of the pattern pieces, because the other thing you have to keep in mind, especially with a collage that has patterned paper in it, or something that's got some really busy pieces in, is that if you make those larger, it's also going to sort of make your collage busier as well. So you have to kind of balance out that busy part of your collage with less busy parts. So you'll see I'm using colors that are very reminiscent of the collages that I did, but I'm not trying to copy them exactly. I'm just trying to create something that if I put all three of these together, they would look like they go together. So now I've decided on the base layer, and I'm going to go ahead and get that glued down. So I have most of the bigger base layer pieces down, and And I'm starting to add some of those smaller design elements. Here I took the old book page and cut some strips to be a little bit more reminiscent of the white strips that are in the smaller collage. I'm taking some smaller pieces and just doing some overlapping to create some depth and to connect some of the pieces together. I really like layering where you can't necessarily see where one layer starts and another layer ends. I like how they kind of overlap and mesh together. So I'm just playing with some of the more transparent-y papers to see if I can create a little bit more of a feeling of depth and layering. And I've got a few pieces that I've got to get in because they're pieces that were used in the original collages. Like this piece was something that was done with a stencil. And I believe this also had some molding paste on it, so it actually has a texture. I used a stencil and I pushed the molding paste through the stencil, so it actually has little raised squares where the stencil was. So that actually has some physical texture to it. And the little white strips I'm putting near this other little piece of stencil paper that I have because that's where it was on the original collages. So I'm trying to keep some things that are reminiscent of that, but this piece here and those shapes are something that were not in the original collage, but I decided I wanted to add them just to, you know, create something new. And I think it just needed something that was a little bit more like a mark on here because it's a bigger space. So this was a piece that actually had some metallic, I believe it's bronze, but it's on deli paper, so it's super transparent-y. So when I put it on, it's going to really add some texture without being really, really sort of in your face as far as another texture goes. But I have some white space that I want to fill a little bit of. I don't mind white space. I love the negative space, but I did feel that the white spaces I had there were a little bit large and kind of odd shaped. So I did want to try to add a little bit of something over it without being too dark. So this transparent paper with the bronzy metallic sort of stencil pattern on it, I think worked out well. And again, I like to just kind of soften some edges sometimes if they're a little bit harsh with another transparent paper, just to create a little bit of depth and overlap, but also soften those edges a bit. And that's the finished piece. And I also did one other version of a collage that I scaled up on a 11 by 14 canvas. And here's how that turned out. Let me know in the comments if you've tried scaling up any of your projects and what your issues were with scaling up, like where you got stuck or what worked for you. Thanks for watching.